You good to go?
Okay, so this is receiving critique. My name is Lady Christiane Regan McNabb, and I've been in the SCA for 30 plus years. I have worked for 2 different schools. I currently work for University of California, Davis. And while I am not a faculty member, I do work closely with the faculty and the residents. And I also worked for San Francisco State University. Additionally, I have owned my own business and have worked since I was the age of 14. So needless to say, I have had a lot of critique and evaluation in my life. I happen to really like using the word critique because it's a less emotionally charged word. But we're going to start with critique is the detailed analysis and assessment of something, especially literary, philosophical, or political theory. And as I said, I happen to like the word critique because it is less emotionally charged. Additionally, I also like the words feedback, and I like the word commentary. Unfortunately, thanks to corporate America, the comment constructive criticism, or the phrase constructive criticism, has now become kind of a dirty word and nobody wants to hear it. So since everybody is taking this class, I figure that you're either here because you want to be able to receive critique, or you may be somebody who is interested in how other people receive critique or something along those lines. So the first thing that I think is most important, and I talk about this in both giving and receiving critique, is trust. As a person who is receiving critique, they are going to expect somebody who's giving critique to be fair, to have their welfare, or to have their welfare at heart, to have the welfare of the SCA in mind. Also, to remember, one of the tantamounts of the SCA is the idea of chivalry, not the knightly way, but the Victorian idea of the virtue. So as a person who is receiving critique, you should be trusting them to give it to you straight. Make sure that you take everything that they say at face value. I try to go into it anytime that somebody gives me a critique and keep in mind that the reason that they are doing this is because they actually care about me. They care about my growth within the SCA, and to see the SCA as a whole become a better place. Don't start trying to read into it. Don't start trying to expect that people are trying to like play games or anything like that, because that way leads to madness. And quite frankly, even somebody that you don't get along with may actually have a good piece of advice. So do your best to try to listen to anybody who comes to you with a piece of critique or a piece of feedback, and try to be open to it. There are 3 kinds of critique to keep in mind. And we're not going to talk about like the different shades of that, but there are going to be those that you're going to ask for critique, but won't name anything that you need to work on. They're just going to tell you, you did a good job. No, you did a good job. Not helpful. There are going to be those that you're going to ask to be straight with you, and they're going to give you everywhere from really good comments like, oh, this needs to be worked on. I would suggest working on these stitches, or I would suggest working on this job more. And then there's going to be people who are going to give it to you all the way to brutally honest, which is well beyond straightforward to the point of being almost offensive and bullying. But try to take it at face value. Try not to take it personally. We're going to get into all of this a little bit more. And then, of course, there's going to be the people that you are not going to ask for any advice from, but who are going to give it to you anyway. And quite frankly, I actually prefer unsolicited advice to solicited advice, because I feel like the person feels like they really had something that they felt that needed to be said, and they've taken the time to seek me out and give it to me, as opposed to somebody who is obligated. They're judging a competition. They're a higher up in the hierarchy of a job that I am doing. They are my peer, as in my Laurel, or something along those lines. So, you know, I actually really appreciate when people come up to me and say, can I give you a piece of advice? Or, hey, I happen to be standing in court and heard you do this. You might want to try practicing words or their names or better, or something along those lines in the future. So that being said, my first piece of advice when it comes to accepting critique is want to work. If you're taking this class, I assume you're interested in getting critique, as I've already said. You may be looking for a way to toughen up yourself so that when you do receive a critique or a criticism or any sort of feedback, it doesn't completely kill you. You may be looking for a way to process them better. No matter what the reason is for you to take this class, you need to be open to committing to future endeavors to being better at whatever you are trying and not interested in whatever you're trying. If you're not interested in working through a situation because there's no way in hell I am ever doing that again, then be honest with the person who's trying to give you some feedback. Don't waste your time. Don't waste their time. Be honest with them up front. Just say, hey, you know, I am never going to do this again. You can save your breath. That being said, I always suggest go ahead and listen to them. They may have a piece of advice that may, even though you may not do this thing again, you may learn something so that the next thing that you do, whatever it is, you may be able to do better because you can go, oh, I remember that piece of advice from when I did that thing that was so terrible that I'll never ever do again. That was a really good piece of advice, and I can use that here in this manner. So I suggest going ahead and listening, even if you're not interested in doing whatever that project was. Oh, you know what? I forgot to give everybody my little spiel. So go ahead and put stuff in the commentary if you have questions and whatnot. I will scan as I go. If I and I'll try to be open and say, you know, hey, I want to talk about that later. I'll come back to it, or we're going to get to that in a minute, or to bring stuff up. So feel free if you have any questions or comments or anything, put them in the, go ahead and put them in the chat. Okay, let's see. So invite constructive criticism. When I was in college, one of the things that we had to actually learn was how to give criticism to our fellow students. And because when it came time for you to finish your degrees or go on to masters or doctorates, one of the things that was continuously run into was that your friends didn't want to give you a critique, or they would only say, oh no, it's really great, which was great right up until the point that you ran into the master's board who said, we're not going to go ahead and graduate you because you haven't learned enough because your paper is bad. It's a weird example, and I apologize because it probably doesn't make sense to most people. Anyway, so invite critique. Sometimes your friends don't want to give you feedback or critique. They may not want to hurt your feelings or are afraid that you may be mad at them. Explain that you want straight feedback, but not brutal, but honest. And I feel like you really need to say not brutal, honest. And if you can, give an example of what you feel is brutal, because your term of brutal and my term of brutal may not be the same thing. If they're still uncomfortable with giving you any sort of advice, don't force the issue. Find someone else to give you the feedback that you want or need. Allow for the possibility that those closest to you, whether it's your partner, your spouse, family member, mentor, or just somebody that you look up to, is not comfortable, willing, or able to give you an honest critique. You may just have to go to somebody else. And it may not be that they don't understand me, you know, it could be anything from you wanted to know if you did a good job in court, and they may not be comfortable commenting on people speaking in public because they're severely shy and they don't like to talk about that, to you want somebody to critique your latest art project and they feel like they don't have the skill to do so. And to them, it looks fine, so they don't know what to really look for. If they're uncomfortable, they should be really on. If they, okay, now you guys have just made me laugh. Now I lost my train of thought. So read the chat. They're talking about drawing blood. So you know, if somebody is really uncomfortable with giving you a critique, move on. There are people that I don't go to because I know that they don't want to critique whatever. They just don't like doing it. It's uncomfortable for them. But remember, you can push a little bit, just a little bit, because, you know, critique and feedback does help us grow. So that's being said, talking about receiving critique. I have some people to volunteer for you, or to voluntold for enteral readings. All right, you two, knock it off. Okay. And you'll note that wasn't critique. It was an order. Okay. Back to receiving critique. So probably the hardest thing about receiving critique. All of it's hard. I get it. I am one of those people who, while on the outside is very cynical, has a really soft heart. My feelings get really hurt. And yet I want critique because I want to grow and I want to be better. So stop your first reaction. Just stop. It's time to pull out that poker face, which, by the way, I don't have. But try your best and give yourself a second to recognize that they're giving you a critique. Even if you have to ask them to repeat what has just been said, give yourself that second. And all it takes is a second or two. You don't have to like give yourself minutes. You don't have to see like, I'll come back in an hour. Now, if you're running to the bathroom, run to the bathroom. Then say, you know, can you hold on that? Can you hold that thought for just a sec? I need to run to the bathroom. If you know perfectly well that you are not in the right frame of mind to accept feedback, tell them, I'm really sorry. Now is not the time. Could I follow up with you? And then make sure that you do. But give yourself that moment. Realize that they are talking to you. Realize that they are giving you some feedback, some advice. That 1 second allows you to shift gears from whatever you were doing and be then open yourself up to the feedback. It's also going to allow you to disengage your fight or flight reflex. God, that sentence is still hard to say. It'll allow you to totally disengage that, well, hopefully disengage that, and be able to be a little bit more open and take that advice or that feedback with just a little bit more, I hate using corporate speak, presentness. So that being said, listen for understanding. It's time to put that elementary lesson that we all hated, you know, the one, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that you can listen twice as much crap, to use. It's actually very useful with feedback. Listen to what they're saying. Stay focused on what they're telling you. Be present. Don't let your mind wander, which, by the way, is really hard for me. And don't start formulating your next statement. Really pay attention to what they're saying. Then speak when they stop talking. And even if they're just stopping talking to say, are you following me? Now you can say, yes. And then ask your question or make your statement. Be polite. They are taking time to give you feedback. I'm not saying that you necessarily always want the feedback. I'm not saying that you are obligated to take the feedback. All I am saying is be polite. I'm also not saying that you have to swallow insincere or unhelpful comments or derogatory statements. They may be a little misguided sometimes, or they just may be looking at something a little differently than you do. Talk about it. Try to work it out. If you're not interested, be honest with them and say, hey, thanks. I really appreciate you taking the time, but I need to follow up with you on this later. Or I've already received some feedback that I've got to process. If I have questions, I will come to you. Just remember to be polite. Try not to take that personally. And this is probably the hardest thing to do. I keep saying that because it's all hard. And so many people in the SCA are all about the passion of being in the SCA, whether it's their passion for their art or the fact that they love to give service and want to do a job and want to help the SCA grow, whether or not they really want to be the next best fighter or want to be the next king or prince or princess or queen, whatever it is. It's really hard for so many members of the SCA and people in general to not take this sort of thing personally. Things to keep in mind is that more than likely the person really does want to help you, really help. So really analyze what they're saying. Are they attacking you, or are they just bad at giving feedback? Are you being overly sensitive? Is this going down like a weather balloon that's hit some power lines? Flaming ball of gas crashing to the ground? We are, as I said, inherently not good at receiving feedback. And we really hate, as a society, being told we're wrong. In fact, we've made it almost an anathema to be told that you're wrong within the US especially. So divorcing yourself from that is really important. If you can't divorce yourself from it, or if the commentary is really negative or going to be very detrimental to your state of mind, okay, I give you permission. Walk away. Tell them now is not the time and walk away. I don't care if it's your spouse, your family member, your mentor, your friend, your peer, just somebody that you look up to, that guy across the way who is really annoyed by the way that you cook the potatoes, whatever it is, tell them that now is not the time and walk away. Excuse yourself. Be polite. Don't flip them off. And just walk away unless somebody is dying. For those of you that were here before, we're back to somebody dying again. But that being said, remember, there could be a cost for you walking away. You may have to listen to stony silence on your car ride home from your spouse or your family member. You may have to explain yourself to your peer. You may have to explain yourself to one of your friends. But it's up to you to decide if now is the right time for you to accept that feedback and if you are really up to listening to it. And one of the most important things that you can do for yourself is probably go ahead and listen to that if it's the right time and you are open to receiving it. Okay, I'm gonna let that sink in for a minute while I go through and look at this commentary that's been going on, or these chats. Let's see. Yes, back to my overcooked potatoes. I'm telling you, if you really want to see how to give good feedback, I should have pointed this out. Really, if you want to learn how to give good feedback, I don't think that they're always good at receiving it. But if you want to learn how to give good feedback, watch the people who are brought back over and over and over again to judge on, like, Guys Grocery Games, Chopped, on Food Network. They obviously are given like very specific talking points. So, but they do it well. Okay. So before I keep moving forward, does anybody have any questions or any comments or anything that you want to say, ask, faces you want to make at me? Now's the time. Oh, I just remembered it's being recorded. Awesome. I'm so glad that face is going to end up there. Okay. So on that note, since nobody seems to say anything, want to say anything. So ask questions to deconstruct the feedback. If you're unsure what they're talking about, ask clarifying questions. Sometimes the understanding of why a comment is important, sometimes asking the sometimes the understanding of why a comment is important is more important than what the comment actually is. Okay, does that make sense? Yes, no, probably not. Okay. Um, be open to an ongoing dialogue. Now, I always use this example, which is if the person that you dislike most within the SCA comes up to you and to give you some advice, and it is freely given advice, and it is obviously not a way that they are going to sink you, be open to the idea of an ongoing dialogue with them. It's really hard, but sometimes they may know something or have been in a similar situation and may want to share that information with you for whatever reason. It could theoretically lead to your growth. It could theoretically lead to you guys being friends. It could theoretically get thrown out in the trash pile of your brain and you may never think about it again. But be open to comments. All right. This one makes everybody annoyed when I talk about it. And that is, don't complain, don't make excuses, but you can explain. So as we all know, there's often extenuating circumstances, and there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. As long as we're back to killing people, it isn't going to kill anybody. You can go ahead and explain what happened, but don't complain to others and don't throw others under the bus. So a good rule of thumb for a starting point is if you can Han Solo your statement that's about to come out of your mouth, you're not explaining, you're making an excuse. If you can say, it's not my fault, you're probably going to be making an excuse and not actually explaining the situation. And quite frankly, nobody who's come up to give you advice needs to know it's not your fault. They may need to know the extenuating circumstances that have happened that caused the situation. They may have some really good advice about that, but starting out with it's not my fault is number one way to have them turn themselves off and not hear you. And I make a really big deal about the fact that they need to be open to hear your comments. So make your comments worthwhile. Also, don't beat yourself up. At best, somebody's going to think that you have really low self-esteem, and at worst, they're going to decide that you're trying to manipulate the situation and get out of a critique. And yes, I have been accused of just that. The hardest thing to do is say to somebody, so, okay, I am currently going through training with the Royal School of Needlework. The first time that I received a critique on a piece, I wanted to argue it, not because I didn't think that their comments were valid, but because I thought that their comments were too nice. And I was accused of trying to get myself out of my critique. And that wasn't the case at all. I just felt that they hadn't necessarily been harsh enough with me. And I got accused of that to my face. And actually, it was marked down in my file, I am told. So it is one of those things that you really kind of need to think about. It may be perceived to you as this is me showing that I'm humble, or this is me looking at my thing that I have done that I'm very passionate about. And, once again, is it service? Is it art? Whatever it is, you may be looking at what you've done and that time that you've put in and think, wow, I could have done so much better. But when they hear those words come out of your mouth, they may think this is a plea for sympathy so that I'll think better of their project. It's a very cynical idea, but the fact of the matter is you may come across that way. So try not to do that. Remember the benefit of getting feedback. Why are you getting it? Why have you asked for it? Why does that person think that you should be getting it? Feedback and critiques help us grow. They help us improve the job that we're doing, whether we're talking about heralding court, creating art, or succeeding on the field of prowess. None of us would have gotten where we are today without our teachers throughout the years. Just because suddenly we're all a bunch of adults doesn't mean that we stopped learning. Somebody is always going to have something to add to your education. For example, I spent all of 12th night going through and making comments and critiques to the people who had arts displays up. I found out one of the pieces of critique that I gave, actually it wasn't a critique even, it was just a question that I'd asked. I asked somebody to tell me how their research added up to what the standard theory is. This person had never heard that particular comment. That being said, I was shocked. I couldn't believe that this person had never heard that theory. However, I had given them something by asking that question because they didn't even know that it could be looked at in that fashion. Whereas from where I stood, everybody looked at it in that fashion and may not have looked at it from where that person was standing. So go ahead and, not only throw out a comment like that, but also take it in. You may not know something that they know. They may not know something that you know. It's always worth giving that feedback back and forth. And because that person can take that piece of information, they can use it, they can throw it out. That's up to them. But now they know what that particular theory is. Yes, somebody is commenting. Is it Ianka? Did I get it right?
Yanka.
Okay. Says, it's not my fault. Han Solo says that all the time because he doesn't own up to his own stuff and never checks things before trying them. It's totally true. And in fact, that was the whole point, is because because all the characters in Star Wars are actually archetypes, and that's his particular archetype. So, and so everybody was shocked, in episode 7 when they found out that he had like run off and left Leia behind. All my friends were like, oh my God, Han would never do that. I'm like, Han would totally do that. Anyway. And I bet he didn't take critique well either. Okay. Say thank you. Your least favorite person in the SCA comes up, gives you a piece of advice, feedback, whatever you want to call it. You need to look them in the eye and say thank you. Unless they're being a bully or they're not really being helpful. But remember what I said, take all the comments at face value and say thank you. They have taken their time out of their day. It doesn't matter if the person that has come up to you to give you that piece of advice or that feedback is your own mentor, your own peer, your own spouse. Somebody has taken the time to say to you, this is something that you could work on. Go ahead and work on this thing. Or it has been my experience that you may not want to do it this way. And in the future, you may want to do it this way, and you may have a better result. They're taking their time to come and give you that piece of advice to make your life slightly better, or increase your education a little bit more. Say thank you, even if in your mind, you're already throwing it into your mental trash pile. Request time to follow up and do it. Nothing is worse than asking for help and then not following up. And I will admit, I have done it in the past. I try really hard not to do it. But if somebody is open and says, hey, if you have any further questions, come and talk to me about this. And you go to them and you say, great, I really do want help with this, but then you never follow up with them. Then they're kind of wondering, like, whatever happened to you? Why didn't you come back? That may actually be held against you next time that you do the same thing. Once again, whether it's an art or a job in the SCA or fighting on the field, if you tell somebody, I want to get better than this, I want to, grow from this, and they say, great, come talk to me, and you never go to talk to them, the next time that they see it, they're going to assume, 1, you weren't really interested in what they had to say. 2, you weren't really interested in growing from that point. And 3, they very well could just shut down and not be interested in helping you in the future. So keep, if you're going to ask for help in the future, ask for help in the future. If you are not going to ask for help in the future, that's fine. You don't have to. Don't do it. After the critique, decide what revisions to make. This is your chance to go back and make your own decisions again. Do you want to try out their advice? Are you happy with the way that everything turned out? Do you want to move forward from where you were? Do you think that what they're going to suggest is not a good idea? One of the problems with taking their advice may be that if things don't go the way that you expect them to, or that they expect them to, now you've got to own it. You took their advice, you did it. When somebody comes to critique you the next time, you can't say, but so-and-so told me to do this. You have to own your own decisions. And that's one of the hardest things about critique, is that you have to own your mistakes as well as the things that you've done well. Okay. All right. So Elsie writes, how do you address conflicting critique? And Claire writes, looking at both responses for similarity and then asking for explanation on the differences. This is a great piece of advice for two conflicting critiques coming from two people who are roughly the same, we'll say, level in your head. Meaning that, you know, they are they are equal in your esteem, we'll say, using Shakespeare. And it's a great place to start. I always take a step back and look at the two people giving advice. And I'm going to use two people because they're in the room and I can use their names and I can throw them out there. So I'm going to use Alazan and I'm going to use Sabrina. And I'm going to take a piece of advice that I get from both Alazan and I get from Sabrina. And those two pieces of critique conflict. I'm going to step back from the two of them and I'm going to look at, first of all, what critique are they giving me? What are they talking about? Are they talking about a job? Are they talking, now that's, you know, are they talking about a job? They're both Pelicans. So am I going to take that under advisement from both of them or not? Are they talking about an art? Is it an art that they both excel at? Is this something that one has more experience in than the other? These are all things to be taken into account. After I take all of that into account, then I may step back into the conversation, if you will, and then ask for more clarification. Or come to them and say, well, you know, it's been suggested to me by somebody else that I do X. What do you think about that? And if they say, oh, I wouldn't do that, ask them why. This is part of that conversation, or this is part of that being open to dialogue comment. Also, ask for their advice, ask for their opinion. If you don't want their advice, don't take it. Or take both pieces of critique and go to a third source and talk to them about it if you're uncomfortable asking questions of those two people. But yes, you know, try to weigh the two against one another. Is there one, and what you don't want to take into account is, hey, now these two are both friends of mine, so I can do this. So I don't have to take into account and say, hey, I know Sabrina loves me, so I know that her critique is meant for my best interest. But Alazan, she hates me. There's no way that she would be suggesting anything that's worthwhile. You got to leave that one at the door, at least for the start. Leave it at the door and really analyze what they're saying. Be more scientific in your thought process here, less passionate about your thought process here. You can finally, you know, after you've really kind of analyzed it, you can then look at it and go, okay, I think that Sabrina does in fact have my best interests at heart here. And I think Alazan is trying to make sure that I get so frustrated that I quit the SCA and leave. Which means that she wouldn't have a dinner companion when we all get to go out together again. So, you know, really try to be open and yet unbiased with your acceptance of critique or feedback. Okay. Let's see. I guess I'm at the bottom. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or anything? Because I have some other talking points that I'm going to talk about, but they're specifically art related and less service related. No? Okay. So one of the things, actually, before I go on to those, I'm going to talk about a little bit about critique consent. Critique consent. If you were in the last class, you heard a little bit about this. You know, when I started in the SCA, I started out in Caid. I've lived in 3 kingdoms. I've lived in Caid. I've lived in the West. I've lived in Drakkenwald. I've lived in both Snogwa and the Mists in the West. And I've lived in Caid about 6 different times. So I keep going back and forth, or I did for a long time. I've now lived in the West for a really long time. And I've lived in the West much longer than I've lived anyplace else, even when you add it all together. When I started in the SCA, critique was kind of accepted and kind of expected. You know, it didn't make it necessarily easy to accept, but especially if you entered like arts competitions or you were doing a job for the SCA, you expected that somebody was going to come out of the woodwork and critique you. So to me, I don't need to give people consent to go ahead and critique me. But that being said, it is kind of nice when somebody comes to me and says, hey, can I give you some feedback, or can I give you some advice, or can I give you a critique on this thing that you just did? I try to always be open and honest about it. But that being said, I'm also part of being open and honest.
Hello?
Need to be willing to say, I'm sorry, did somebody have something to say?
Just a note, you do have 20 minutes until the next class.
Okay. Finna, can you give me that 5-minute again? At 4:55?
Sure, not a problem.
Thanks. So while I try to keep myself open and to it, I also have to be honest with somebody who's giving it to me. I have to stop and think, am I really open to receiving this right now? Would I rather get it later? Do I want to get it at all? If somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'd really like to give you a critique on this, then I feel like to make it worth their while, I need to be at my best to accept it. I very rarely turn down feedback or advice. And when I do, I have a really good reason. So that being said, though, I have told or asked people, I really want that, but can you give it to me tomorrow? Can you give it to me? Can I get it from you in writing? Can I email you or Facebook Messenger you and get it from you that way? But be open. If you don't want it, if you don't want advice, if you don't want feedback, if you don't, and somebody comes up and says, can I give you a piece of advice? Say no. If you don't want it, say no. It's not your obligation to listen to it. It's up to you if you want it or not. And if you don't want it, be honest with them. Just tell them. Be polite, but just tell them. Okay. So right now, we don't have to worry as much about judging competitions or competition judgments or that sort of thing. But one of the things that's hard to deal with in receiving critique is getting back that judging form. You know, if you've ever entered an arts competition and you get back that judging form, and it says something not nice, like, wow, that's terrible. What made you think that was a good idea? That can really shoot you in the foot. And for something like that statement of, wow, that was terrible, there's no way to come back from that. Somebody could have been having a bad day and just written that down because they had nothing to say. Or they could have something against you and maybe you guys don't get along. Or maybe they really do think that that was really terrible and they have nothing nice to say about it. But here's my comment on that. You can take that judging sheet and you can go and try to talk to them about it and say, what's the haps? Why would you put that? Tell me what's wrong with it. Or you can ball it up and throw it in the trash. The first arts competition I ever entered, I got the judging comment of, that's a terrible resource. That was it. That's all I got. Not helpful. Never entered another cooking competition. I may be able to tell you what makes a good resource now, but why would I want to enter? Was the applesauce actually too spicy? Was it not spicy enough? It was an applesauce, for crying out loud. Did you not like it? You know, was it not cooked down enough? Was it too cooked? Was it burned? There's so many questions that I had. And unfortunately, it was blind judging. So it wasn't even like I could follow up with the person. I remember picking up my dish, looking at it, walking to the nearest trash can and dumping it. And then I balled up the judging sheet and threw it in on top. And I had this Laurel, who I'm friends with, walk up to me and say, why would you do that? And I explained the situation. And she's like, well, you could have learned from it. I'm like, learned what? Not to use the resource. I got that down. I do not need to keep that judging sheet again for it. And it was not my best moment. And I look back on that part of it and get really upset. But on the other hand, that judging form, there was nowhere to grow from that. So leave the forms that have no growth potential for you, leave them behind. I'm not saying make a really big deal about walking over to the trash can and balling it up and throwing it out like I did. It's very high school of me. But take it home and throw it in your trash. Do the exact same thing, but do it at home where nobody can see you. That being said, if somebody comes to you and wants to critique like a piece of art that you have done, be ready with your work. Have it available. One of the things that I always do when I'm going through my courses with the RSN, I realize I've got 5 minutes. I'm going to start wrapping this up. One of the things that I always do when I'm going through my evaluation forms is I always, one, pull out the piece of work. I always look it over side by side. And I love the fact that one of my favorite mentors is always willing to sit down and go through. And she goes through point by point with me. And I look for exactly what they are talking about. I make notes on the sides of my evaluation form. So sometimes the decision was made to make a mistake or what they consider a mistake, and I did it on purpose for some reason. Sometimes it was something I didn't see. Sometimes it's just a bad stitch, whatever. The fact of the matter is, though, that they are evaluating me to be better. I opened myself up to that so that I would be better. Just like being in college or in high school, open yourself up to it. Take notes. Make sure that you're looking at your piece. If they have the time, sit down and literally go line by line through it. It really kind of can help out when you're talking about an art piece to do that sort of thing. Once again, open yourself up for dialogue. Hopefully they're open for dialogue to discuss it with you further somewhere down the line. I have one person that I go back to years later who judged a piece for a competition that I run things past all the time still. So I love that. I love the idea of handing your sheets to a friend and having them review them and you taking theirs. I think that's great. And it's actually, I'm going to totally steal that and go with it. Thank you so much. That's a great idea. Yes, exactly. Totally peer review. So that being said, if nobody has any further questions or anything, I'm going to let Finna go ahead and cut off. No? All right. Thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it. If you are interested in a handout, I'm going to create one. I was working on the handouts up until about 30 minutes before the class. So, and I want to make some more notes. So if you're interested in a handout, either send me a note via Facebook Messenger. I'm listed as Shannon Mick-Smith, MCSMITH, or you can send me an email at pandoorah@comcast.net, or just track me down. I am around. So thanks, everybody.